I don't want to go on the computer on a Saturday, and I just want to draw and relax. It's a Saturday. Hello and welcome to the DD Drunkduck Quackcast. We're up to number 599. Jesus, we just keep on going and going and going. That's incredible.
Wow, it's almost 600. Yeah.
Yes, almost. Next week, that's the 600th. That's quite an achievement. And I suppose for the 666, we'll have to do some kind of special horror thing. That will be...
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Or perform an official exorcism.
Exorcism.
Finally clear this podcast of demonic infestation.
Well, did you know The Exorcist was originally a book? I'm pretty sure.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and it got adapted into a film. It was source material that got adapted.
What?
And guess what? That's what this Quackcast is about. Source material that gets adapted into something else.
Oh my God, how coincidental is that?
It's amazing. It's just incredible.
That's blatty. That's downright blatty.
Blatty. It's the blattiest.
Yeah. The guy who wrote the Exorcist book. That was his last name.
Blatty.
That was yeah. Jeez. But anyway, go ahead, please.
What a weird name. So I thought you were just giving us random 1920s slang there, but maybe it's both. So yeah, we're talking about like how source material can be changed in order to go and be adapted. So we've talked about adaptations before, but we've talked about them like in a good sense, just talking about the adaptation itself. But now we're going to talk about how a source material is like the thing, you know, that's the gold, and how that can be like changed in order to, you know, make a bigger profit or whatever, or messed up, or like degenerated in its adaptation. So we're going to talk about the source material as the key here, rather than all the adaptation stuff. So, oh yeah, and it was inspired by George Rockall Schmidt, which is a YouTuber, and he was just did a quick little video about adaptations, and it was really cool. So we're going to be chatting about that subject. But before we do that, I've got to bring up the featured comic. I featured a comic this week, and I don't think this is an adaptation of anything. This is the original source material, and it's called Crimson Stars. So, I'll tell you about that now. Crimson Stars. Hello, I'm Ozone Ocean, and my feature for the week was Crimson Stars. Deep in the cold vacuum of space floats a massive troops transport warship beset with hatred and rivalry. The Navy hates the army they're transporting. All the senior officers are vampire elites, and they have no respect for their normal human underlings. The situation was already ripe for a blowout before all the blood ration suppliers for the army turned bad. Now things are looking decidedly tricky. Will Brigadier Takara and her clever officers be able to successfully navigate the danger? This is a sci-fi drama space opera about a military space force with a vampire hierarchy and all the problems that involves. The art is nicely finished, digital, full color, and realistic. It's a great piece of work. It's by a team, actually. The artist is Lagarto, the scriptwriter is Komazar Taken, and 3D modeling is by Morhiel and GK. So, yeah, quite a group of people all working on this together to produce an interesting piece of work with a really interesting social dynamic between these groups of characters. It's quite a large world, and they've done us a favour by not giving us a huge big info dump to set this up. We're kind of being introduced to this world through the interactions of the characters and what's happening between everybody. So we're slowly sort of having the world open up to us, even though it is quite a complicated setup. We're not finding it complicated, we're not finding it boring. It's an interesting thing, and it's good to see sci-fi that's ambitious and taking on a large world, because too often sci-fi is very lazy and sticks to a very small niche spot within the sci-fi world, and all the rest of the world is just collapsing, so you don't have to talk about the rest of the world. You only have to talk about this tiny little world or this tiny little spaceship with these 3 characters fighting an alien, and that's all most sci-fi is these days, unfortunately, due to the fantastic film Alien many years ago. But so much sci-fi is just copies of that. We don't find much world building. There's The Expanse and things like that, and even to a lesser extent something like Firefly or Galactica. So it does happen, but if you look at most sci-fi movies, they tend to be of the alien horror thing, very small. A lot of sci-fi comics tend to follow that as well. Not many people tackle this large space opera. On Drunkduck, there's a few, like I think Gene Joke has done his excellent Star Trek influenced work, which is fantastic, and of course there's the fantastic Star Trek that does this. But yeah, it's good to see it. Okay, so anyway, give Crimson Stars a look, and I'm sure the creators will appreciate that. And it's rated T for teen. And that was the featured comic, Crimson Stars. Okay, so next up we have the featured music, and I'm gonna tell you about that right now. It's the theme to Gumwallace has given us the theme to Mega Maiden and the Chop Chop Princess.
Nice.
Heavy, deep bass synth thunder dueling with percussion and synth guitar in a fierce fight for dominance, which turns into a dance battle to the death, with the bass synth landing the final decisive blow. So take it away, Gumwallace, with Mega Maiden and the Chop Chop Princess. Gumwallace doing the theme to Mega Maiden and the Chop Chop Princess. Okay, so adaptations. Source material, rather. Source material is a really cool thing. Like, I love original source material. Everything's source material when it's like an original piece of material. I suppose you could only really call it source material if it's been adapted, so it's retroactively source material. I don't know. Whatever. But this is what we're talking about. So what I mentioned in our little Patreon video was one that I would talk about, which was Addams Family. So that's what I want to kind of talk about. But I suppose we should introduce the topic. So, I was watching this video by George Rockwell Schmidt. He's this excellent critic with this magnificent voice and presence, this video presence. He's amazing, and I like to watch his videos because he's reminds me of the old-timey critics. He's really cool. But he did this little video on source material and how it can be bastardized in these adaptations in various ways. And so you watch these adaptations and maybe a lot of people never think to look at the source material because they'll just see the adaptation. You know, like it's a movie or a TV series, and you haven't got time to read a book or read a comic or whatever. You just look at the thing as it's done. And he's talking about how the original material is unfairly done by a lot of these adaptations. You know, the versions you get in the adaptation is a lesser copy. You know, like it's a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It's degraded. And that's rather interesting because there's a lot of different reasons for that. Sometimes adaptations can be better than the original source material. You know, that I'm sure that does happen, and sometimes they can just be just as good but changed in a way because, you know, that they've had to be changed for this different thing, and they become their own thing, you know, as a movie or whatever. But oftentimes that's not the case, and the original source material is something quite special. And so, yeah, so the Addams Family is a great example. So the original source material is, of course, the comic by Addams. I can't remember his name. Who's the author of the Addams Family comics?
Charles Munster. And Charles Addams. Yeah.
Charles Addams, really? So,
yeah.
So he produced these things originally as comics, but not as like a comic book or a comic story. These are just one panel jokes, you know, like The Far Side or something. But in this world, the idea, the interest in this was because the characters are bizarre looking, they're very gothic and dark, and the humor's basically based on, you know, opposite world, you know, Oscar the Grouch sort of thing, bizarro world kind of stuff. The world is awful, but, you know, they think it's great. That's the unfair. The characters didn't actually have names. All of them were completely unnamed. These were just these characters that Charles Addams created, and they were just in these one-panel comics. It wasn't even a real, like a proper family. They were just a family because that's what he called it. So that's the original source material. But I think, and so the first adaptation of that was the Addams Family TV series in the 1960s. With John Aston and various people playing the roles. Fantastic, awesome series. And I think we can also look at that as being source material as well, even though it's an adaptation, because Charles Addams had input into the TV series, and it was through the TV series that they came up with a name for the character, for John Aston being the character. They came up with, you know, Gomez and Morticia and all this. So that was named for the actors. That wasn't named for the comic characters. So it basically is like that is the source material, because also the characters didn't have personalities or a life or really familial relationships until the TV series was created. So that I would think of the TV series as being the source material. So the adaptations we now have that really are adaptations are, of course, the movies. There's the two movies with Raul Julia playing Gomez, and Jessica Houston, I think, as Morticia, and I can't really remember the rest of the actors, but you know. So there are two films. That guy doing the Fester. What was his name? He was Christopher Lloyd. Excellent. There we go. And Christina Ricci playing Wednesday. Oh my god, my memory's incredible. So those were an adaptation, and a lot of people do not know the original TV series. They don't know where that came from, and that's a huge loss. They don't understand it. And since then, there's now been, I think it's a movie or a TV series, I'm not sure. But, who does it star? I'm not sure. So there's a new Addams Family out. And they've done a weird thing. I think because John Aston's character was called Gomez, so now there's this weird misconception that he is like Spanish or Latino or something. So they've gone into that they've gone into that misconception, and they've just gone into it. So first we had Raul Julia, who's a Spanish man playing the character, and now we have I can't remember his name. He's a great Mexican actor or Latino actor. But now they've gone into it, and they've changed that from the source material to make it like it's totally altered it, because the original character was meant to be like a 1920s businessman kind of thing, but a very gothic kind of 1920s businessman, but very much in this American style. But now he's been changed to be sort of South American, and it's that's fine to do that for an adaptation, but it's not the source material. And I think they've also, gone along in ways that are like modernist in, the modern style of changing things in order to make it more like ethnically diverse or whatever, which is a popular thing to do these days. But I think they're adapting it more from the Angelica Houston, Raul Julia movies than they are from the original TV series. So a lot of what made the source material so great is being lost, I believe, in these things by doing an adaptation of an adaptation. I think, and people saying, oh, but this actor, he looks more like the original character. And yeah, he does look sort of like the original character in the bizarre way he was drawn, but that's not really the Addams Family. That's just the comic that started it off. The Addams Family is the TV series from the 1960s. That's the source material. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so that's just one thing I was thinking about from an adaptation, how it can be, you can miss out stuff. And really, I think everyone really needs to check out the TV series and really get invested in it, because that is so much better than the movie. I mean, people don't realize that the Addams Family movies with Raul Julia and Angelica Houston, although they're fun, they're just like 2-hour like romps, and they're a real kind of summary of the TV series. They're a real kind of like a very little précis of what you get in that full TV series, which is the full glory. And just to skip over them and go to those movies and have those as your touchstone is criminal. And so many people do. So many people I've talked to, they've got no idea about the TV series. They just think of the movie. And I think, you fool. Raul Julia's portrayal of Gomez, he's not doing an original character there. He's doing a pastiche of John Aston's character and how that developed over the course of that TV series. He's doing his own little, very quick summary of that character. And Angelica Houston's Morticia is like, doesn't hold a candle to the original actor. It's incredible. So, that, from my perspective, that's a thing where source material is being left in the lurch. I don't know, maybe you guys have got other examples of source material that is sort of
left in the lurch. You said left in the lurch. I like it.
Yes. You're right.
I've seen the original series, at least some episodes. I don't know it really well. I mean, I guess if you see a few episodes, you kind of know it. But it was fun, and I love John Aston. It was weird that he wasn't in the '90s movie, huh?
It was totally bizarre, and he was still young enough to have actually portrayed the original character as well. Because
actually, he looked the same like his whole life. Like you'd see him later. It's like, holy cow, he still looks exactly the same as in the '60s.
Yeah, that's amazing.
He was awesome. I love him. He was great. Very weird that he didn't like get a cameo or anything. So strange, but he was always really good.
Yeah,
So your new adaptations, this thing has been adapted a lot too in recent years. Nothing I've seen other than the movies, but I know the new. Are you talking about the new series Wednesday? Has that come out yet?
Is that what the series is called?
It's called Wednesday and focused on Wednesday, and I think it's created by Tim Burton.
Well, that is. I'll just say.
Does that qualify? Oh, sorry.
Oh no, Tance, go on.
No, I was going to just say that does that even qualify as an adaptation though? That's a spin-off.
Well, a spin-off and that has come from an adaptation, but that is so that thing, the Wednesday one, would be very much an adaptation of the 90s movies then, because that character only became a thing from Christina Ricci's portrayal in those movies. Because in the comic, of course, that character was neither here nor there, and in the original TV series, she and Pugsley were just equals. There was nothing special about Wednesday at all. So that has been totally built on an adaptation of an adaptation, which just leaves the source material high and dry. Oh my goodness me. And I'm not saying it won't be a good thing. Like, it could be excellent. The TV series or movie or whatever it is could be incredible. And I'm not saying the Addams Family movies from the 90s were bad either. You know, they were good. But I'm just saying they were obviously not as great as the TV series. That was all. And they've lost things in between. Anyway, so that was my big thing that I wanted to rant about. But we have a lot of other stuff. You know, there's The Hobbit, which is definitely a big thing. Yeah.
The Hobbit though is easy pickings. What I would rant about is the actual Lord of the Rings trilogy, which is an adaptation of massive source material, and honestly, I think before that it was thought that it couldn't really be done, that it couldn't be adapted into movies, and so that's like huge props to, oh my god,
Peter Jackson.
Yes, thank you, Peter Jackson. Because my brain wanted to say Michael Jackson.
Yeah, props to him too.
Yeah.
Oh, you're killing me, Thomas. You're killing me.
About TV and films that stretch or disregard the source material.
Huge props for that. But on the other hand, I do think that it's not a proper adaptation of the work. And of course, like, this is my personal opinion, doesn't mean that it is accurate or whatever. That's in my perspective and my experience of the book. I don't think it is a good adaptation. Not because the world building
about TV
A+. I mean, they went above and beyond with how the elves looked, how, like, everything that Tolkien described, it's in there. But they butchered the ending, and the ending is where everything culminates into a very solid, specific theme, at least for me. And the one that stayed with me was in, like, after the triumph of Gondor, basically, and Aragorn becoming king, blah, blah, blah. Like, after that, the scouring of the Shire, it's a huge thing. They don't go back to their idyllic life. Evil has saturated their home. They go back to hell rather than to home. And that is super important. And it was cut. And I think that this butchers the experience that The Lord of the Rings is. And it was a huge missed opportunity. And don't get me started on the characters. themselves. So I don't really think that it is a good adaptation. It is an excellent masterpiece of a trilogy, absolutely. But when we talk adaptations, I do think that it is not a good representation of the book as an experience. For that reason, like if you take away significant parts, like you will need to cut stuff from a book, especially a book that much massive, absolutely. But what you cut is important, and if you cut the finale, then that is important. So, and we never get to see why Frodo is considered wise and everyone respects him. For what? You don't really see it in the movie, but you do see it in the book. Why he is so respected, how far he has come along, why he is actually a very powerful character that you never get to fully experience because he chooses not to show certain things. So yeah, I mean, yeah, for me it will always be that missed opportunity.
Oh,
that will probably never happen because now the Lord of the Rings has been done, so nobody else is going to do it. And
probably true, yeah.
There we go.
Well,
yeah, and those movies have such cultural. The movies are massive in culture, right? Like they have so much resonance. So I can definitely see how that would be disappointing to someone who says that, oh, you're missing these great things from the books.
Yeah.
Yeah, these gaps.
Well, they're doing an adaptation currently on Amazon Prime, but before The Lord of the Rings. It's
like the Rings of Power, cool. You mean?
Yeah. I don't
know.
Well,
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing it. I just don't have access. But again, it's not The Lord of the Rings. It's, I don't know if it is the Silmarillion or whatever, but it's something else.
I think
it's not The Lord of the Rings. So
I'm scared to check it out. I think it's something totally different. And
I wouldn't mind. I mean, I have, like, I haven't really actively looked for it, but there has been some griping that you have sort of diversity among the elves and stuff. I don't mind, honestly, that sort of thing. I find that it makes sort of sense in the sense that, yeah, you will have your high-class Rivendell Lothlorien elves, but then you probably have a whole range of different races of elves if you move beyond certain areas.
One huge problem I have with that kind of stuff is that you're talking about like some kind of fantasy world, all right? And I think we've talked about this before. So they're not just a fantasy world, so they're set in like a medieval kind of thing or like Renaissance world or something like that. So the rules of the specific genetic diversity and culture and stuff like that would apply. And what I mean is then that in small rural towns and countries, it'll tend to be people will all look the same. However they look, they're going to look the same. But in, say, port towns or like trading posts or this kind of thing, then you'll have the diversity. Like on coastal towns or like bigger cities, that kind of stuff, you'll have a bit of diversity. And it won't be that much because people tend to be very tribal and they don't like to be as diverse as they are in the current world. See, a lot of people have this mistaken view that the past is exactly like the present, and our current like diversity that we have now, which is due to advances in like peace, for goodness sake. You know, the world is so much more peaceful now than it was in the past, and advances in travel and, you know, social mobility and economic mobility, all this kind of stuff, which has been incredible. But that's only what we've had now. In the past, we had people moving around, but not as much. So people were way less diverse, and it wasn't just because of racism. It was just because people couldn't physically go different places, and those rules very much apply to fantasy worlds. So then, say you could have your forest elves, and they would be they would be like physically distinct from your Rivendell elves or your high elves in Westron or whatever. So you could do that, but they wouldn't be mixed within them. So you could have all different kinds of people, but more
again,
in
it depends how you do it. That's what I mean. I mean, like I'm thinking when I was creating my races for the Art of Veiling, they are pretty like non-diversified between the nations. They are very much alike. But I have designed them in a way that if you wanted to have, for example, if you were to adapt this world and you want to have people of color in there, you can absolutely do it as long as you keep them sort of homogeneous within the specific nations or like cells of populations that I have designed in the different countries that there exist. And I did that consciously. Like, okay, so these guys are all white, but they could just as well be all brown or yellow or whatever. So, but they have to all be that because this society is basically bigoted, so they have to be that. So there's that as well. I wouldn't mind that. What I would mind would be to change my social dynamics to portray them as what they are not, because part of the point of the whole Art of Veiling is how this society crumbles. And you won't be able to show that if it is already not what it is in the beginning, if you know what I mean. So there's also that. Well, it depends.
It's hard to talk about this because you skirt around like topics of racism and you risk becoming like saying racist stuff yourself. So it's tricky. Like
why would it be racist though? I mean,
because
we are talking.
Yeah, but the problem is it's talking about something you often have the risk of becoming it. This is
not really. I mean, for example, the elves themselves. I mean, how they are written in Tolkien, they are pretty racist a-holes.
Well, I was just
if you see how they talk about other races.
I think of a funny example. It's remember Saruman?
Mm-hmm.
So he's the expert on rings and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in his expertise and his study of the orcs, he actually becomes evil himself. So it's a great example of that. The closer you get to a subject, the more you risk becoming.
I don't think that Saruman got corrupted. He got corrupted because he used the Palantir a lot. That was his problem.
Oh yeah, the thing, but
the words.
The communication thing.
Yeah, that's why he got. I mean, and also he kind of wanted it as well. So that's also. But what I mean to say is it depends on, like, if this series of with the Rings of Power, they want to sort of spin off the source material, and it is not actually an adaptation, but it is a reiteration of something, like a reconceiving of this world. I'm okay with it. What I wouldn't be okay with it is if they would say, okay, this is how Tolkien envisioned it, because it's not. But if it's like, okay, now we're going to take these toys and play, and this is what we're doing, okay, why not? It's fine.
Well, I can't really comment because I've consciously avoided this stuff.
Yeah, I don't really know of it either. So I'm just saying, like, what I caught on Twitter about it.
Well, Another adaptation was, and this was another thing that George Rockall Schmidt mentioned, was the Wheel of Time series, which is the Robert Jordan books wrote in the 90s, and they were adapted by Amazon Prime into a TV series. I don't know how well regarded it was. I watched the first episode and thought, this has nothing to do with the books. This is totally different. And it's meant to be an adaptation of the books. And it strangely loses like a lot of stuff from the source material that you'd think, hang on. Like, okay, to give a bit of a background, so Robert Jordan was a very much like a serial fantasy writer. He started as a contract writer doing, stories, he became popular doing stories for the Conan stories. So they had a bunch of writers they would pay to further adventures of Conan. So that was the famous pulp series from the 1920s, 1930s by Robert E. Howard, and many years later there was his estate is paying people to continue the legacy and to continue writing books. So Robert Jordan became very famous doing Conan stories, and he sort of picked up the idea, hang on, look, if I'm wanting to be like a working writer and make money out of this, there's a formula I have to follow to be to make stories that people like. And he got really good at that, and he got into doing this Wheel of Time, and that was his big thing. And so the first book is very much like a pastiche of a lot of fantasy. So it's got a bit of Lord of the Rings there, it's got a bit of Dune, Herbert's Dune, Frank Herbert, and all these kind of elements are very obviously packed into it. And even though it's a pastiche of all this stuff, it's still like entertaining, and it's like a pithy. It's a good, tight kind of young adult fantasy adventure book. It's really, really quite a good little product. And then he, of course, back then in the 90s, the thing was to write big series, like 500-page books, and you'd write like many of them, and that's what he did. So he did another book, which was basically the same kind of plot again. It furthers the story a bit more. Then he did another book, and he kept on going and going. And I don't know how many he's done. He did like maybe 13 or something. But they started to get a bit, padded out very quickly and stretched out. So it was like he had this idea, like, I want to do like a 12-book series. I don't have any ideas, so I'm just going to stretch it and pad it. But anyway, so the first few books were really kind of on point. The guy knew what he was doing. He was a good kind of jobbing writer, knew how to write fun young adult fantasy. And this series on Amazon Prime has like totally flushed that down the toilet and failed. And what I mean is that because this first book was just so tight and so good at being like a young adult fantasy series, young adult fantasy novel, this first book, you could so easily, like any amateur could have adapted that into a great movie, like a really pithy, just like great movie. And doing a TV series these days, you've got even more kind of freedom, even though your budget's not quite as big as a movie, like, because you can stretch stuff out and do all these digital effects and stuff like that. They could have turned that first book into like a 5-episode series so easily, so well. Instead, what they did was they adapted the entire first book pretty much into one episode of this thing, and they did it in such an unfaithful, such a weird way. They lost so much stuff from this first book that was, would have been so fun, and then they adapted it in a way that makes it, more politically correct and more modern in, ethnographics of the characters, and then we're sort of having the problem of being racist again by, saying, oh, it wouldn't have been so diverse. But in a small mountain town where all these people grew up together, and and they're isolated from all the other people, they would have been pretty like inbred, pretty much. There wouldn't have been much difference because it's meant to be like a small mountain town. These people have their only communication with the outside world is like traveling salesman in a horse and cart that comes around once a month or something like that, and they have a special feast day, that kind of very traditional kind of setup. So yeah, it was they changed stuff in every kind of way possible, and it watered it down. Like this story is not a clever story, but it is well written in that it is a great adventure story, adventure fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
And they just lost all that. So it's not being what you're losing there isn't the great, like for the Hobbit, the great ending. What you're losing there is the structure.
Mm.
And it's a loss.
Absolutely. And the focus as well. I mean, in the Hobbit, you have this weird elf dwarf romance that comes out of nowhere. Like I could like it if it was at least built up properly. It just happens out of the blue, among other things. Anyway, that reminds me all of this. This I think it was in the 80s or early 90s, somewhere there. This movie, Masters of the Universe.
Oh yes, my God, with Frank Langella playing the Skeletor. Oh my God, and Dolph Lundgren. Do you remember?
And it was nothing like it, because I think they get tossed like through a dimension rift or whatever into the current world, like the modern world, and stuff like that, which is completely irrelevant. It's a different story and a different movie than Masters of the Universe, and they just tack on an initial weird Skeletor thing just so that they can have the title. So there's also that.
It was bizarre. The truest live-action version of He-Man that we'll ever get is this ad, and I can't remember what it was for, but it was brilliant. The Skeletor they made and the He-Man they made for these particular ad series. You've seen it, Tance, I'm pretty sure. No. Oh, goodness me. I will have to find this because they do the Dirty Dancing routine. Skeletor and He-Man.
Oh, really?
Yes. It's beautiful. But these characters, they look incredible. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, yeah. The movie with, Frank Langella or Langella playing Skeletor. He looks nothing like Skeletor. He's not even skeletal. It's just a man with a bad mask and no nose because of the mask. And it's done on Earth as well. So He-Man was a weird kind of copyright-free adaptation of Conan. Hanna-Barbera didn't have the rights to Conan, so they made their own thing, and they called him He-Man and gave him blonde hair.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where that comes from. But it became its own thing, and it really was its own thing. And that movie, just as you say, it bears no relationship to the source material whatsoever, apart from the name.
I remember being so disappointed. And then we have the elephant in the room in terms of adaptation, which is all the Disney movies. They are all adaptations of fairy tales or novels, and they are all basically not adaptations. They are inspired by the source material because it is bent out of shape horribly. That doesn't mean that the end result isn't fun and high quality in terms of craftsmanship and artwork and stuff, but it is not a proper adaptation. And I remember the first shock I had with this as a kid was I really liked Peter Pan when I saw it. So being a hopeless bookworm, I found the original Peter Pan book because I just wanted to read more about Peter Pan and read the story with more details, blah, 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 the whole thing. And I remember being so traumatized by that book because it was completely different to what I saw in the Disney. It was like the Disney version is super sanitized, happy-go-lucky, has no real discussion of mortality as there is in the book, and so on and so forth. So that was my first shock. And the second shock was Mary Poppins, which I also sought to read after seeing the musical. And oh my God, the emotional whiplash.
Really? I've never read I think I've read Peter Pan, but not Mary Poppins.
I have read Mary Poppins. Actually, I have read, I think, at least 2 or 3. I mean, I don't remember how many books are in the series of Mary Poppins. At least 2. If there are just 2, I have read them all, or I have read the first 2 anyway. So that I found. I was blessed with a school that had a huge library, and I probably read most of the books there for as long as I was in that school.
That's pretty awesome.
Yeah, but it was like, again, a completely different tone, completely different plot, and like the premise was the same, but that was all. Everything else was completely different. The character was different. Mary Poppins is a different lady than who she is in the movie. So, yeah, I mean, nobody prepares the poor kids for that. I was not prepared for this.
Yeah.
Imagine some kid watching the Hunchback of Notre Dame and then going to read Victor Hugo.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Yeah.
Like, imagine that poor kid, what they are in for. So
it's been quite brutalized. Well, actually, speaking of adaptations and how they've changed things for the source material, I think we did mention War of the Worlds in our adaptation cast and how that's been changed in so many different ways, but a lot of it really misses what the source material was about. So the source material was written in the late 19th century, and it was about technological development in at the time and how amazing that was. But even though the technological development was so amazing and so incredible, it was nothing compared to what an alien species had developed, which actually ruined everything that humanity had done like this. And then again, even though these aliens were so advanced, they were destroyed in a second just by something as simple as a virus. So there's always a bigger monster out there or a smaller one. So, but that was what it was about. But then again, it wasn't just about the theme of technological development and something else is always better than you. It was about like the 19th century and how things were changing so fast. And none of the adaptations I've ever seen or that exist anywhere capture that. The fact that, the world is developing and changing and advancing, and we're so great, in this 19th century world. And then that is, totally being proved to be useless, which would be, incredible, because this was written in a time when Great Britain was the most powerful empire in the world. and that's not captured in any of these American adaptations that have been done. You know, America was the most powerful empire in the world when those adaptations have been done, but it wasn't about, you know, that really wasn't really a part of that story, but that was part of the original thing. So yeah, you can lose very, very key things from, like, contextually from your adaptations. Like, say, in The Lord of the Rings, one of the things that really annoys me was that people do not understand this whole relationship between Frodo and Sam Gamgee isn't as friends. It's as an officer and a Batman, where that's the relationship that comes from. And what I mean is, like in the British Army, what you'd have is an officer would have a servant who was not of the same social standing as him. He was a lesser
like an ordinance basically.
Yeah, he was a lower class person, and because it was a very class based society that Tolkien came from, and that person would look after his, like, shaving in the morning and would get his clothes laid out, all this kind of stuff. He would literally do all that stuff. He'd run around and do the menial stuff for the officer. He would be assigned to him to do the work. And Sam is exactly that character. This is like Sam was the gardener in The Lord of the Rings, and he, you know, joins him as his partner. But there's always that social divide between the two, and it's not a divide between the two because, like, you know, they just don't know each other that well or whatever. There's a class divide, and that was very important. That the relationship did advance, and they did become friends towards the end, but the fact that they bridged the social divide is very important to that friendship being as good as it was.
And it is quite powerful when it does happen, and it is why Sam calls him Mr. Frodo the entire book almost, basically. So there's that, and then when they do have this, it's beyond just being friends. They become basically like brothers. So there's also that, and you miss that. And you also miss the quality that Frodo has as an officer, in the sense that he is the leader of the expedition, basically, when they start off from the Shire. And there is a reason for that. He has the capacity. He is a leader, and we don't ever see him as a leader at all in any circumstance. He is always someone that needs rescuing, and someone that lacks a spine, and he never grows the spine in the movies. So there's that.
He's coddled.
Yeah. Which is why I really didn't like Arwen stealing his big stance that he takes against the ring wraiths, which is huge. I mean, that is a huge turning point for Frodo as a character and for his company, basically. So, she steals his thunder, basically. And everyone else does as well. I mean, everything that Frodo does, some other character does instead. It's like Peter Jackson hates Frodo in particular. Like, he flips off this particular character. Like,
I love it when you say flip off, Dance. It's my favorite.
Yeah. Like he really likes, and he showcases Sam's development pretty well, but F off Frodo, you in particular. Like, I don't know what the problem is and why he hates him so much, but he does, absolutely. So,
freaking Frodo.
Yeah. F you, Frodo.
Poor little Frodo.
Yeah, I'm surprised that he didn't also fall into the the Crack of Doom, together with Gollum, and just and Sam should be the one that returns with the ring in all his glory and be done with it at this point. Like throw him into the fire as well.
Yeah, exactly. It's the movie was very good in some respects, as you've said, and quite poor in others.
Mm-hmm.
Because they just lost a lot of the stuff, because I don't know if they didn't get it, or whatever, or they just wanted to change stuff. Like, there are a lot of reasons you would dilute source material in order to change it for an adaptation. This George Rockwell Smith talks about the fact that sometimes you want to stretch something out. So you're making a lot of money on a TV series, you want to keep on doing a TV series, so you do extra seasons and stuff like that. So how do you do that? You basically repeat the same story over again. You expand the world a little bit and you just keep on going, but it loses some of the story. Or maybe you think, I have to adapt this to a modern audience, or I have to make it more punchy by putting in like a love affair or a love triangle, or building up these two characters, bloody Legolas and Gimli.
I think they really just wanted to tell Aragorn's story more than anyone else's.
Oh yeah, because it's a love story.
Yeah, it's a love story, and it's with beautiful people, and because of course Aragorn was turned into a beautiful and handsome man, although he was anything but in the book. So there's also that, which belittles Arwen's choice as well, because Arwen loved him despite being A, younger than her, a lot younger than her, and B, ugly. So that goes out the window as well.
he was scarred and weather beaten, really scraggly, sort of.
Yeah.
A man
ugly.
who had lived rough for a long time.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I mean, those were artistic, like creative choices, and it has nothing to do with screen time, because they had plenty of time. Like you have the same scene basically. You don't need to change the scene. It won't take up more time if you do it properly. So it totally was, okay, we're going to show off Aragorn every moment we can at the detriment of everyone else. And we're going to also focus on this romance that in the book is very tangential in a sense, and we're going to make it this whole huge thing for the ladies, I guess.
Well, we're coming to the end of the Quackcast now, so we better wrap it up before Google cuts our little rug from under us.
Yes.
Pulls out that tablecloth and leaves us floating.
Before Google adapts this into a Netflix miniseries.
Well, I don't care if they dilute the source material as long as they pay me a crap ton of money.
Well, sure.
I'm one of those creators.
A horror movie called Hangouts.
Yes. Oh, we'll all die in the end. That's the thing. We get an hour to live.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you guys for listening to this Quackcast.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.